Well, hello, welcome back to A Course in Miracles, specifically to the workbook for students. Oh, yeah. And general question for you, how are you finding your experience in the workbook? This is a question that you're welcome to email me, tomas@tomasgarza.com. At this point, we're about halfway through the lessons, and we discover, if you haven't had this discovery already, at some point you may well have this. And it's a sense that, well, even though numerically we're halfway through, more or less, we'll be talking about lesson 182 in this video. So we're approximately halfway through the workbook. You realize that it's not about simply going through the numbers 1 through 365, numerically, methodically, even though that appears on the surface to be exactly what we're doing. There's more to it than that. There's something more going on. And by this point, we've learned a lot, a whole lot, right? That may be the spiritual understatement of all time, is that by lesson 182 in the workbook, you've learned something about yourself. So a reminder as we launch into today's idea that lessons 181 through 200 are aimed at removing specific blocks and hindrances for us. And these are blocks to the awareness of love's presence. In other words, they're blocks to the awareness of who we really are. Now, we're going to take a profound step in each of these next 20 days to hone in and laser focus, target specific blocks that we're keeping stubbornly, of course, in our blind adherence to the ego, and interposing between ourselves and the experience of who we really are. We're covering up reality with some of these blocks, and as we discover going through, they're deeply ingrained, aren't they? They're deeply ingrained in our thought system. They're deeply ingrained in the confused, yet somehow consistently confused worldview of the ego, to which we've adhered for countless lifetimes. And that is precisely what we're setting aside right now. So let's talk a little bit about today's idea. And it's a very beautiful idea. Lesson 182 simply says, I will be still an instant and go home. I will be still an instant and go home. So whether you practiced meditation or yoga or any practice like that prior to beginning the workbook, you'll know, of course, now that the practice periods that the workbook calls for are nothing other than meditations, and they can be brief. Some call for 10 to 15 minutes, others very brief. And the reality is, if you don't have 15 minutes to do today's practice period, do what you can. So by this point, I know that you've had the experience of forgetting a daily idea, right? That happened to me several times the first time I went through the workbook. And you may be going through this with me right now for the 10th or 11th time, or even more than that, because there are a number of you watching that have been a course student for 30 years or more. And the wonder of all of this is we're absolutely still learning. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing. And we just keep peeling away one layer at a time. So today's idea, I will be still an instant and go home, calls on us to do just that, to be still for an instant, which is actually all it takes. One does not have to become a monk or a nun, shave one's head, unless you want to, but you don't have to move off to the Himalayas. You don't have to become a legal resident of Nepal in order to practice meditation happily. Can you imagine if that is exactly what we had to do? There would be a lot less peace in the world, wouldn't there? And there would probably be a lot less peace in your own life. So, what we're asked to do here is to be still for even for just an instant. Now, I always say a successful, highly successful, wonderful, beautiful, relaxing meditation can be as short as one breath. It's another way of saying all it takes is one instant for us to experience the truth of who we are. The Course talks throughout about the little willingness. That's all we're asked to provide and to supply, is the little willingness to get out of our own way, even if just for a second or two. And that allows the Holy Spirit to pour into us, to rush in and show us the way. I will be still an instant and go home. The commentary for today's idea is very beautiful in that it insists on something that we all know is true. No matter how many years or decades or lifetimes we wander around seeking happiness outside of ourselves, seeking it in pleasurable sexual relationships with hot, sexy partners, sometimes several in one weekend, in booze, in beautiful gourmet meals, trips to the Greek islands, luxury cruises, bigger houses, more money, more prestigious jobs. Not that some of those things aren't tremendously fun, don't get me wrong, but when we seek our happiness in the world outside of us, we're bound to keep seeking. The egos dictate, seek but don't find. We discover that happiness, joy, love is an inside job. It is. It's only to be found within. How do we access it? We calm and quiet our frantic minds. Enter the central presence of meditation in spirituality, or if you prefer, of prayer, of quiet contemplation. You name the name for the practice. We all understand what the Course is getting at here is it's quieting the mad chatter of our own minds enough to allow who we really are to just be. It's never gone anywhere. When we're racing around frantic, we close ourselves off to it. So deep down, we know this. No matter how many decades, lifetimes we may wander, actively denying the truth of who we are, there's some inclination, there's some memory, isn't there? There's some spark of awareness that keeps pulling us back, however gently or strongly. Yes, there's something that keeps us coming back. In your lifetime, that may have been multiple instances where you felt this pull, that there's something more out there, and it brought you back from where you were to spiritual practice. And voila, here you are studying the Course. So we know the truth about ourselves. We must simply allow ourselves to experience this. So what happens when we're peaceful? We can hear the voice for God. We can hear the Holy Spirit. We can access and feel the universal inspiration. Those are all the same thing, just different words. And I invite you to use whichever term you want. A Course in Miracles uses dozens of different terms to describe the Holy Spirit. Dozens. Those are just a few that I just named. There are so many. They're strewn throughout the text, strewn throughout the workbook, the manual, all components of the course. And what we're doing is we're accessing our own innocence when we allow ourselves to hear the voice for God. We're accessing our true strength, which, as we know from past lessons, is in fact our defenselessness. It's not in our big brawny posturing. It's not in a veneer that we put up in the world. In other words, it's not the Lamborghini that we rent so we can take pictures and show up and look fabulously wealthy on Instagram, is it? Now, if you actually own a Lamborghini, message me, will you? Because I'd like to go out for a drive with you. I don't have to drive it, but you can. And let's go fast. Please and thank you. Okay. Let's see. We're allowed to digress, right? Because no one's saying that we can't have fun in life, but we do if we ultimately wish to wake up. We need to seek for happiness where we're going to find it, where it exists, where it lies and has always been. And that is within. Our defenselessness is our strength. Lesson 182 reminds us our defenselessness is our strength. So let us be still an instant, even just one instant, and go home. Let us experience the peace of God. When you do, you will not go back to seeing the world as you did prior. If you've had this experience, you'll know what I mean. It takes any number of forms, but you just know. It is an experience. In other words, it has to be experienced. It's not something that we can talk about and intellectualize, because who we really are is beyond any concepts. So it's beyond the intellectual thinking mind. Happily, happily, right? Because if it weren't, we would simply run around in an endless cycle of confusion, dividing and subdividing and categorizing reality into multiple parts: kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, subspecies, and on and on and on and on. And that's how we work in the world. That may work really well in high school biology class, but in reality, our subdividing and our categorizing simply keeps us stuck. It keeps us stuck and cut off, because as we discover in moments like these, where we're still an instant and go home, even if ever so briefly, we discover that it is a unitary experience. Reality, truth is oneness. It's just that. So I invite you to carve out some time today, whatever that looks like for you. And at this point in the workbook, you'll notice that the course is not calling for a specific number of practice periods, such as 2 or 3 practice periods of 5 to 10 minutes apiece, things like that, that it was calling for earlier. Now, that is absolutely necessary early on to establish some habit for this. Now, whether you did 5 to 10 minutes that were called for, or whether you only did 2 or 3, doesn't make any difference. You might have done a couple hours, I don't know. It's to establish the habit and get the course's thought system into our minds, because it's very different. The ego doesn't want us to admit that we don't know our own best interests, which is a central thing for us to admit. That we don't know what anything is for. You'll recall one of the very first workbook lessons. I do not know what this chair is for. I do not know what this body is for. I do not know what these eyes are for. I don't know what this computer is for. Now, remember that exercise? We've come quite a ways to go yet. But today's idea will go a long way toward dropping our defenses. This is the obstacle that we're honing in on today. By being still an instant and going home, we're accessing our own strength, our own defenselessness, and resting at peace, dropping the sword, so to speak, dropping the sword, the shield, the automatic pistol. Yeah, we're dropping all of that, even if just for an instance, to experience the peace of God. You won't be the same once you do. All right. So today, as always, happy practicing, and may this be very peaceful and a wonderful experience for you.